Perfect. Mm-hmm.
Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm still waiting. I'm seeing all of you connecting, all 22 of you, and more still coming. We're waiting in the waiting room, and it felt like as I let you all in, you just came flooding. But it's so good to see all of you. You can say hello to me.
Good morning.
Hi,
good morning,
Carolina.
Good morning.
Now I feel much better. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, good to see everyone.
Good to see everyone too. Good morning.
Good morning. So the plan is we're just waiting for one more person. Emmanuel and Sam are joining the waiting room. So we'll give them 30 seconds and then we start, because we've got an exciting session ahead of us and we don't want to lose any precious minutes with our experts. So with that being said, I'm seeing some good mornings messages. So thank you, everyone. But let's start our first workshop of our first module. We should do, I don't know if you've ever seen these videos, someone at the beginning of a party and at the end. We should do something like this, us at the beginning of the program and us at the end. How are we feeling about it? But this session today will be great. And I know it will be great because it will be led by, and I can ask someone to mute their mic. Brilliant. So the session today will be great. And then I know it will be great because we've got fantastic experts from Tectonic. We've got Dan Parry and Joshua McGovern with us in the room today. They've been delivering this session for our Accelerator cohort since cohort 1. And they are experts when it comes to customer discovery, research, and validation. Dan is the co-founder and head of product. He's got over 10 years as a technical product person. He worked for so many sectors, and you'll see quite a lot of him on this program. Joshua is the co-founder and head of customer research at Tectonic. He's been user researcher for almost 5 years. He worked with many companies, and today, both of them will be sharing their experiences, their frameworks that they use in their job to help you with customer validation and discovery. And I know I've mentioned it before when we were in person in London. With this module, we want to approach it from an open mindset of, even though there might be elements of it that I've already experienced, this is there to reinforce some things, help you approach them from a different angle. So with an open mind, I really hope that you enjoy these sessions and take on the learnings shared by our experts. So Dan, Joshua, let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carolina. Really happy to be here. Really great way to start the morning. And as Carolina mentioned, we're going to be talking about a lot of things that may sound simple in theory, but the application of simple things in reality is the things that throw people, because most people try to overcomplicate things, but actually the simple things are the best way to get the correct, unbiased answers that you need in order for you to grow your business or make better decisions. But with no further ado, I will get started. Let's go from here. So the agenda for today, this morning, is, let me move the screen around so I can see you all. So agenda for today, little introduction. We'll talk about what customer discovery actually is. We'll then talk about assumptions and how they are critical for you to be able to make the right decisions and do analysis on the decisions that you make and the data that you collect. We'll have a short 5-minute break for you to get fed and watered in a short amount of time. And then we'll talk about the problems that you may be trying to tackle within your organization and your business, and how to frame them correctly so that you can get the data that you need. And then we'll talk about defining your target customer in order for you to be able to figure out who your customer might be and then go and ask them the right questions. But the definition part is the key. And then tomorrow, we'll talk about how to find your target customer in order for you to get those questions and get those answers that you need in a practical way. Writing unbiased questions, again, so you can get the data back. The way that we usually think about this is trying to make it as scientific as possible so that the data that you get back makes it easier for you to make business decisions. We'll talk about conducting interviews. Joshua has done countless customer interviews, so he'll be going through that a lot. And then the important bit, again, of the analysis and decision-making. And by taking this process and doing it as scientifically as possible, it makes decision-making significantly easier than just guessing or going on your gut, which are sometimes good, but sometimes not so good.
And none of this is to say that you haven't done any of these things before and you're
Absolutely.
doing everything or anything wrong, but for some it will be a recap, and for others, hopefully just a fine-tune to processes you might already have touched on before.
Absolutely. And also the other thing as well is that this is not the only approach to be able to do things. Like, there are many businesses who have done completely different things. There are many different approaches. This is just the approach that we've taken in order for us to do the research that we do for our clients and for our own businesses. So take what you will, apply it to your own business. If you have any questions or thoughts, or you don't think that something's not quite right, then let's have a discussion and we can just, we'll grow together. Cool. So quickly, who are we? So we are Dan and Joshua, as Carolina so greatly introduced us. We're entrepreneurs, so been entrepreneurs for about a decade now. We are educators, so we have been teaching customer discovery and customer validation, applying the things that we've learned practically, doing this work in order for us to be able to teach it, and then in teaching it we get better, and then use that process to help other people generate more revenue or create better products or pivot into the right place. We're underrepresented, so our challenges are challenging on occasion, but that's why we try to use the data to be able to make it so that the decisions that we make are less risky, because the repercussions may be higher depending on who you are. So the problem, and we always like to focus on the problem. So the problem is businesses make important decisions without reliable customer data. So the solution is we help businesses get customer insights from their current and target customers so that they can make better business decisions. I'm going to make myself a tiny bit smaller so you can see some of the text, and hide myself away there. Boom. Cool. So, and we do this by finding a business's exact customers, conducting customer interviews and surveys, and doing data analysis. So we'll figure out what the problem is that you're trying to have. We'll figure out who our assumed customer is for that, whether it's about keeping your customers, getting new customers. We'll conduct customer interviews and surveys to get unbiased data, or as unbiased as we can. And then we'll do that data analysis in order for you to be able to make a decision based on the assumed problem and your assumed customer. We fundamentally believe that when trying to grow your business, all the answers are with your customer. Depending on how you ask them and depending on what you ask, they might not give it to you in the right way, but the answer is with them. If you're like, I need to generate more revenue, you want to be more specific about the more part, but it's like, okay, how do I generate more revenue? What are the things that you could do? What questions would you need to ask in order for you to generate revenue from retention or from growth? Is it product development? Is it better marketing? Is it this? And you ask your customers the right questions, they have the answer. No question is off limits. If you do not understand something, that's because we've done a terrible job of explaining it. Or if you have a specific use case, then we can try and maybe answer it so we talk about the process so that it's more relevant to everyone else. But yeah, please, like if you don't understand something, that is our bad. So yeah, please ask any question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I like answering questions because it makes me better too. Cool. Customer discovery. So customer discovery is figuring out who your target customer might be based on your assumptions. So you've heard me use the term assumptions before. You've likely seen it all over the place in the Lean Startup and other books, theories, but actually recognizing your assumptions is critical. Customer validation is collecting and analyzing unbiased data to figure out if they are a customer you can and should scale with. So you've got the discovery, who is my target customer based on my assumptions and based on the activities that I want to do. Validation is collecting that information, analyzing that data, and figuring out if they are a customer you can and should scale with. Lots of people have business goals, and the current customers that they have might not be the customers that they actually can scale with or should scale with based on their own personal business goals. This is a customer development model, and ultimately, in essence, it's about repeatedly doing that process of customer discovery and customer validation based on your business needs and business goals and business challenges, iterating on, so you do the customer discovery, iterating on that process of figuring out who that customer might be based on the customer validation, and then redoing it. And I'll be repeating this phrase a lot during the process, but ultimately this iteration is constantly happening. Typically, people think that once I've done the customer discovery process or the customer validation process, I'm good. You might be good for a while, but because the world is always changing and your customers are always changing, you will need to consistently do customer discovery and customer validation in order for you to retain your customers and grow your customer base. Then you've got the essence of customer creation, which is like the activity of doing it and company building. But ultimately, where we're focused on is, okay, who is my customer? Are they my customer for what I want to do? Let me do these activities, and then completely looping that consistently in order for you to keep and get new customers.
And just before we move on to that, the reason why it's kind of so important that Dan is stressing that is that you are able to do the customer discovery part once and the validation part once and find a customer. And you can go down that path of building with that customer, selling, making revenue, potentially even making profit. And that's almost more dangerous than never finding one at all, because you may invest time, effort, money in pursuing and trying to scale this customer because it was the first one it worked with. But ultimately, actually, had you done more rounds of discovery and customer validation and that iteration process, you would have found out, the customer I'm selling to now, out of all possible customers that I could sell to, actually, they're quite low down my list. So we want to make sure when we talk about customer creation and company building, as Dan said, it's as commercially viable a business as possible. It's as scalable a customer as possible, rather than just, this person will buy from me, but I kind of can't go anywhere else beyond that. So we're really focusing on who are your best customers, not just who is a potential customer.
Yeah. And also the interesting thing as well is that the reality of business, obviously, is that you need to make revenue in order for you to like continue to exist as a business. So a good example is with Tectonic. Our first company was called Meteor, and our customers were early stage founders who wanted to build products and services and digital products and services. Typically, they couldn't afford our services. So we managed to scramble and like get customers, but they weren't the ones that were right for us. It was really hard to get them. They typically didn't have that much money. And if they did have money, if they were like, oh, I want to build an app, and we were like, this app costs 15 grand. And they were like, cool, this is my last 15 grand, like this. So this really matters, because if this fails, and that changes their whole mindset, it makes it much more difficult to keep them and engage with them as customers. However, what we realized was, A, we need to eat, pay rent. So cool, these are our customers for now. But we had to figure out who is our customer. Does that mean that we need to change our model or change what we do? So typically now, in order to serve early stage entrepreneurs or different entrepreneurs, we do education, and then we build apps for businesses, or we do larger bits of work. So this takes into account reality, as in like, I need to eat, I need to pay rent, but also doing that customer discovery process and consistently doing that means that you'll be able to figure out who is the right customer. Cool. Yeah, customer discovery is the process of figuring out who is the right customer for your business idea. The goal of customer discovery is to validate your idea with your potential customers and make the necessary changes for the idea to be commercially viable. So obviously different businesses have different commercial viability goals, and commercial viability is different for different businesses. But I think the key thing is making the necessary changes. What changes do I need to make in order for me to reach my business goals? Though this customer is giving me money, or they understand, or they want my product or service, is this the right customer? What do I need to change to make it easier for me to produce this, or easier for me to sell this, or makes them want to stay with me?
To emphasize that, it's not like, for if we take Tectonic again as an example, it's not like early founders ever stopped wanting to work with us. So we made a decision to be more commercially viable, that actually we still want to serve you, but we have to do it in the way that makes most sense to Tectonic as a business, from a revenue perspective, from a time perspective. So as Dan said, making these necessary changes is not necessarily turning your back on a customer or never doing business with them again, but it's optimizing the business or optimizing the service or the product, so that either you can continue to serve them, but in a way that works for you, or perhaps transition to your better customer over time.
Absolutely. And customer discovery and validation is an ongoing activity. As I mentioned, you're going to keep doing it. Lots of people think that once they've done it once, they're good. It's ongoing because everything is always changing. Your market is changing. Customers are changing, whether they've been with you for a week, or whether they've been with you for a month or 10 months or a year, 10 years, like they are now changing. Opinions are changing. So like, let's take into account, for example, food opinions. Being a vegan was the butt of lots of jokes 10, 15 years ago. Now it's a normal thing. Price changes due to a number of factors. Technology, good example is ChatGPT and all of this AI stuff. Like, that's changing technology and how people operate. It's making people build better apps or more engaging products and services. It's like, people talk about how now you don't really need copywriters, because you can use something like ChatGPT, which is, in case you do not know, it's a AI product that allows you to ask it any questions and it gives you an answer back. So you could say, write me an engaging marketing ad for your product, and it will do it for you. Because things are always changing, you will need to always constantly engage with your customers and potential customers in order for you to reach your business goals. So you've got an idea, and this may be an idea about your new product or service. It might be something about a marketing thing that you need to do, or a retention activity that you want. You may have a problem that you want to solve, or a solution that you think might work. But how do you know if the problem you are solving is useful for your potential customers? And how do you know solving this problem will help you reach your revenue goals? And just because you may have customers and you may have some sort of intuition of, like, this happened in the past, it's likely to happen again, that might not be true. And you do this by acknowledging your assumptions and making decisions based on data. And the assumptions part is key, which is why we shall be talking about assumptions. So what is an assumption? Generally, with our process of doing presentations, we like to start from the basics. So what is an assumption? Assumptions are statements that you believe to be true based on your own observations and or personal intuition. I assume my customer will pay $89.99 for this product because I guess they always have. I assume that this marketing, me spending 100 quid on Instagram ads will generate £1,000 of revenue because I think I'm good enough. I think that making an AI product to help people conduct customer research will be a good business idea because it makes sense.
I think, and just to really tune in on the key part of this, it's based on your own observations and personal intuition. And we'll go on and talk a little bit more about this, but this is a terrible example, but it's just come to my head, is that I may believe that I could sell fried chicken to kids. And that would be based on the observation, well, they're doing it anyway, some children are doing it anyway. And that's where you see the gap between, there's no data that says they'll buy my fried chicken, just I can see them buying fried chicken out there in the world. So it's this key part about, you see something, you believe it to be true, and go back to kind of talk about our business in general, is if that's all the proof that we have, then we are making decisions based on assumptions rather than actual data related to more concrete impacts, outputs and inputs.
Absolutely. And also in not recognizing that you're making assumptions, you also don't recognize all the other assumptions that need to be true. So for example, the thing that I like to think about is, okay, if I wanted to make like a commercial space enterprise, I'm like, cool. People are buying flights on spaceships now. People are going on Jeff Bezos' spaceships, they're going on Virgin spaceships, they're going on SpaceX, they're going on a bunch of other spaceships. That doesn't mean that they would go on my commercial spaceship. This doesn't take into account that I do not have the potential contacts or potential capital. What other assumptions am I now making just because I've made this assumption? And I'm spending a lot of time about this because once you recognize that you are making assumptions and figuring out how to validate them, it helps you understand what that gaps of knowledge are. There's this concept of, I think it was like Donald Rumsfeld in the 80s, which would talk about space, but ultimately it's this. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. There are known knowns. There are things that I know. There are known unknowns. There are things I know I don't know. And then there are unknown unknowns. Those things in space that you don't even know exist, like those 5D aliens, like just things that you don't know about because you've never done these activities, you don't have enough data or evidence. So in order for you, and sometimes you don't know you're making assumptions about those things. Lots of people make assumptions about their business idea. Lots of people don't recognize that their assumptions are assumptions. For example, you might assume that people will have the problem, pay to have the problem solved. Like something might be a big problem for people. They might say it. One of them was lots of people were coming to us with ideas for making an app for barbers to be able to take bookings, Black barbers to take bookings. In principle, it is a great idea because if you do not know, going to a barbershop as a Black man is a terrible experience most of the time. You just have to turn up and then say, hey, like, do you have time today? They'll look around, they'll be like, yeah, come back in an hour. You come back in an hour, there's like 4 other people there. So then you say, okay, cool. I know I might be late. They might say an hour, so I'm going to be there an hour early. And then there are a whole load of and then you're just there, just waiting around. And then other people will be like, oh yeah, there's another guy who's said he was going to come. The whole thing. So like lots of Black people, Black men specifically, would come to us and say, hey, I want to build an app to help barbers manage their time. Barbers do not want this. They want the flexibility of being able to just guess. They don't want to be able to have lots of them. And again, this is the assumption part, is that actually different types of barbers have different needs. So for some, the barbershop is a communal space for them to chill and chat. So that type of barber doesn't have this problem. So understanding all of these things that you may not know or may assume helps you figure out, okay, is this actually a problem worth solving? Because some people won't pay for it just because they complain about it all the time. Assumptions are a best guess until you have evidence that validates them, invalidates them, or partially validates them. They are a best guess with the evidence or information or activities that you've done until you have evidence that validates them, invalidates them, or partially validates them. Is this true? Is this untrue? Is this kind of true? Every time I talk to this type of customer and ask them this type of question, they say this thing. Like 9 out of 10 times, they say this thing. Cool, that's relatively validated for now. Every time I ask them this question or this assumption that I made, actually, it's untrue. Or the worst part, or the most challenging part, is that actually this assumption that I have is kind of true. Like it's like there's something in it, but like I can't determine whether this thing is actually true or not. And sometimes businesses and organizations and individuals make big decisions based on things that are kind of true. And the challenge with that is that depending on how much resources and how much capital you put into it, if something is kind of true, like ish, at some point it will be kind of untrue. And you don't want to put a lot of capital or an emotional capital into something that could potentially not reap the rewards that you wanted to do because you have no evidence that's based on.
I think that's actually probably the most common state.
Absolutely.
Sadly, but the most common state that people experience. And there are kind of real world and real business examples of that. Is if you're able to acquire a customer and they spend some money with you, but for whatever reason, you're not able to retain them either completely or retain them as well as you want, there's some assumption or something that you believe to be true that is true on the way in, or true enough on the way in, or the customer believes it's true, whatever the makeup of that state is. But once they get in and they experience it for a while, either it didn't perhaps live up to their promise, they thought they were going to get something else, and suddenly it's like, I don't understand. They sign up, but we can't keep them. And it's that thing of like trying to understand what is the core thing that I'm making an assumption around, or not quite understanding, scaling that back and then going, okay, if I break that down and I understand that I assumed this here, if I go back and check, I can understand what it is that's helping me or that's making me lose a customer, or I've got a hole in the bottom of the bucket, something's not quite working on the way out. And then you can adjust, as kind of Dan said earlier, making the necessary changes to be commercially viable. So if you are experiencing something now throughout the presentation where it's like, oh, actually, I think I do sit in that kind of true, partially validates state, I'd be hard pressed to probably say that almost everyone is probably in that. And Tectonic ourselves, we're still in that for certain things. So we were in that for a long time with particular customers. So as we go through this is, by no means a case that you should kind of have your head in your hands. Like, this is just the nature of the customer validation, customer discovery, business building process. There will be long periods of time where it's kind of right, or right enough for me to make revenue and profit, but not right enough to be kind of completely commercially scalable in the way that I want it to be.
And the thing as well is that the state of your activities or state of your assumptions may also change as well, right? So like something that was true a week ago may be kind of true now, and like is now untrue later. So a good example is, again, I'm using AI as an example because it's kind of changed the world, but these AI tools allow you to be able to generate text. People have now been able to, kids have been using it for a while to write essays. So, for example, it's just someone has used it to pass the law exam bar, right? The value of a grade from Oxford was good a year ago, potentially. Kind of good now, depending on how good you are at being able to test whether people have used AI to do to pass their exams may not be valuable in the future because schooling is completely different. This is an extreme case, but the nature of your assumptions and the nature of your activities may also change. Just because it was true in the past doesn't mean it's true now. It may not be true in the future.
Yeah, and just before we move on, kind of an example that's not kind of product based is that we saw was kind of during COVID, in that there were assumptions made around Brits didn't want to, dine outside in the cold, or there was no demand or market for collection from shops that weren't just doing kind of restaurants. It was like, I don't know, people's cheese shops or their wine shops. People did collections in that way. Suddenly, whole business models that there was an assumption that nobody wanted prior to this, and that assumption was likely validated and true enough within the time span of a few months, completely undone, and for a while that was the saving grace to many brick and mortar businesses. So as Dan says, like, these things, even though that's a large once in a while example, these things do happen, and they can affect all of our businesses. So as Dan said before, it's like, that's why it's really key to be doing the bouncing between customer discovery and validation and that iteration process, because yes, in my example, it would have been very difficult to miss that market change. But there are other much more subtle market changes that if you're not clued in to speaking to your customers in whatever fashion on a regular basis and testing if they're still your customer, you may miss. And that may be missed revenue, that may be missed opportunities to acquire more customers, but we want to put you in a position where you don't miss out on opportunities to grow your business in a commercially viable way.
Yeah. So again, bringing it back to the real life, there is a coffee shop near me that makes delicious food. They are currently struggling a bit, and they don't know why. They were recently doing well. Their coffee and their food is relatively expensive, but like, people were coming in, and now they have not asked people, as far as I know, why that is. It might be for a number of reasons. It might be because it's winter, people don't want to come to places. It might be because their prices are now too expensive for things. It might be people are working from home and doing delivery more. Like, understanding your customer and their customer behavior and challenges will help you make better decisions, because they may just assume that, like, in the spring, people are going to come back. That might not be true. You can use your assumptions to form questions that you can analyze the data against once you've collected it. I assume that price is an issue. What questions do I need to ask in order for me to determine whether price is an issue? I assume people want to go to space. What questions do I need to ask in order for me to determine if they want to go to space? What are my assumptions? And then what questions do I need to ask so I can figure out whether that assumption is true? That should say decisions, but this will help you make meaningful decisions later on. I have an assumption about something. What questions do I need to ask in order for me to determine whether that assumption is true? I have an assumption about something. What will help me understand what other assumptions am I making? We've typically broken down these assumptions into these sections. So is it related, the assumptions that you're making, are they related to the problem that that your customer is facing, or that you are facing? Is the assumption that you're making related to existing alternatives? So an existing alternative is typically when people talk about their product or service, they're like, oh, I've got a coffee shop. My competitors are all the other coffee shops in the area. And that's assuming that your customer knows all the coffee shops in the area. An existing alternative is, what are your customers actually doing to solve the problem that they have? So if the problem that your customer has is just getting coffee, then an existing alternative might be making coffee at home, might be ordering coffee online. If the problem that your customer is solving is just needing to get out of the house, then it might be going for a walk. It might be talking to friends. These are the existing alternatives, but you need to understand what there is an alternative to. Solution. Is your assumption related to the solution that you are looking to provide, or the solution that they have? Are you making assumptions about the solution that you've provided, that is satisfying your customer and satisfying them enough for you to reach your business goals, and making them want to continue to pay you? Your customers and users. What assumptions are you making? Are they related to your customer? Are they related to your user? Depending on your product or service, your customer and your user may be different. Good example is tutoring. Your user is the child or the person who is having the tutoring lessons. Your customer is likely the parent or guardian. They may have different goals. They may have different needs. I used to work in IT. I was often told by my manager, this is a new tool that you're using to manage the services. I was the user, he was the customer. The sales team of these B2B products or services they wouldn't be talking to me. I was too low. Junior IT in a marketing agency. They didn't care about me. They tried to talk to my head of IT, trying to talk to the CTO. Is the assumption that you're making about sales? I assume that I can continue to sell my gym subscription at this price. I assume that people want to buy it at this price. I assume that selling these classes in groups of 6 will help me reach these goals. I'm assuming that this selling my product at $5.99 a month is suitable. Sales and pricing. So I guess that's more, some of them are more pricing. Sales are some of the sales activities that you might be taking. I assume that, and the marketing, they're all kind of like similar and all depending on your goals, but are you making assumptions about your sales and your sales process and your desire to sell? I used to think that I have no desire to sell and I'm not a good salesperson. However, it depends on what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about things that I'm passionate about, I'm not selling, I'm just talking. Some of these assumptions are assumptions about your customer. Some of these assumptions are assumptions about your process. Some of them might be about internal processes. Some of them might be about your own desires and needs. I assume this is a problem that I want to solve and I want to continue to solve. You might not even like your customers.
It helps.
It helps. But recognizing that your assumptions around these sectors will help you figure out what questions you need to ask in order for you to be able to determine whether your assumption is true, untrue, or kind of true. And if it is kind of true, okay, what questions do I need to ask even more for me to determine which parts of this are kind of true? Because I don't have the money to make a big bet on this, or I don't want to make a big bet on this. I don't have the emotional capacity to spend 10 years trying to solve a problem that isn't a problem. I don't have the resilience, or I don't care enough. We'll put this in the chat, maybe a poll. Question, which of these assumptions should you validate first? So answers in the chat. I assume that pricing my product at £20 a month is accessible to my target customer, an assumption many people make. I assume that pricing my product at £20 a month is accessible to my customer. I assume that my customers are exhibiting behaviors that show that they want the problem to be solved. I assume that my customers are exhibiting behaviors, and we'll talk about behaviors a bit later on, that show that they want the problem to be solved. People come into my coffee shop, buying coffee. Oh, I guess they want coffee. I assume my customers are educated in the problem. I assume that my customers know that this problem exists and are relatively familiar with it. I assume that my customers want X functionality in the app. I assume that they want calendar features. I assume that they want Apple Pay. I assume that they want this. We've seen lots of twos in the chat. Yeah, twos, got some threes as well. We'll wait for a couple more.
Mhm.
And if you are struggling with this, it's because this is hard. We've built a whole career out of this activities that we're talking about and this specific activity. Lots of people rank the assumptions that they have equally or misjudge which ones are the most important ones, potentially.
And in fairness to anyone picking anything other than the norm in here, like the margin is tight.
Yeah, this is the hard question.
Between what the first and any other is.
Yeah, 100%. Joshua, do you want to?
I will. So as I'm saying there, like the margin is tight between all of them. But if there was gosh, I've got 2 minutes with target customers, if I can only figure out what the answer to one assumption, I would be going with number 2. I assume that my customers are exhibiting behaviors that show that they want the problem to be solved. And I think, without getting onto the next one first, the reason why this is first is because, for a number of reasons, but one could be from a time resource. It's like, do I want to be making an effort to try to sell to someone who's showing no evidence that they want this problem to be solved? They may want it to be solved, but do I have the time? Do I have the resources to spend time trying to convince someone that they want the problem to be solved, then prove that I am the best person to do it, then sell it to them? So this is more just about a case of focus. Who am I going to focus my attention on? What type of target customer? I said the margin is tight between the others because number 3 is a really interesting one, because there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. So I assume my customers are educated in the problem. The reason we put this here is because sometimes we as, and I say we as in speaking for you guys, we as experts in our business or experts in our business area and industry can recognize when somebody has the problem that we are trying to solve. However, they may not recognize it as a problem due to, in the best way, like pure ignorance, like, oh, I just didn't know. Or kind of, generally speaking, they don't have enough education in the problem. So they are aware of it, but they don't have enough education to recognize, oh, there might even be a solution to solve that. So, and this is an interesting thing because we generally talk about this as an education gap. And we've done lots of projects where you get to the end of it and it's like, so they've got the problem, but they don't understand the area enough. You may need to make a decision. Do you want to spend the time, money, resources on educating this target customer in the problem and then converting them? And that's its own thing, that's its own kind of business case. But 2 and 3, 2 slightly pips it, but 3 is an interesting one as well. And Victor, I'll come to your comment in a second. To speak about the rest of them, after the problem, let's say you confirm that people are willing to purchase and ideally they have a relatively good level of education and knowledge around the problem, then it would be, okay, do they have the financial capability to pay at a particular price? £20 is a whatever number, but do they have the amount of money available to be a customer for me at a revenue point, at a a commercial that is revenue generating and ideally profit making for them. Number 4 is at the bottom, and it's actually something that we see most common, anybody pick for, but it's something that we see most common in early founders. And it's where we get so wedded to an idea of how we want creation that we essentially go into interactions with our target customers and even current customers with the sole objective of, tell me you want this, and what you may want to do be what they need, but it's still not the way to go about it. You still want to try and understand what the problem is first, and then try and understand how they experience the problem, and then map a functionality or solution or physical product to their needs. So to recap, we go 2, 3, 1, 4 in terms of priority. But if you did 3 and then 2, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because you have to ask them similar questions to understand 3 as to understand 2 any. So 2 and 3 are kind of paired. Victor put in something saying we come across number 3 a lot in waste sustainability problem where we are working to solve. Yeah, I think one of the areas that we've seen needing kind of further education in the problem has often been in some of the sustainability projects. Council level, or I think we've done some in eco fashion.
Ooh, Joshua, you're breaking up a bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, just saying that, Victor, that's not surprising, because that is definitely an area that we've seen in the work that we've done, that sustainability is kind of like beyond the surface level, myself included. Lots of people's level of knowledge is not that strong in kind of the problems around that area. And Sam, yeah, in terms of, as you say, kind of adopting that lean startup methodology, it's like, okay, cool, like this is a lot. So how can I break this down? How can I simplify this? How can I put this into a framework that allows me to go kind of from section to section, understanding what is most important first, still looking at that big picture, because none of these assumptions are not important. Even if you find out that the customer doesn't want your functionality, that's one of the best learnings you could ever get. So now you could stop wasting your time trying to build and or sell, market this thing that no one wants. So everything on here is key. It's just, as I said, if you had like 2 minutes with someone, I'd be like, okay, let me find out if they have a problem, so I even know if I want to spend 2 more minutes with them on 3 or on 1 or on 4.
Very quickly, regarding Victor's point of we come across number 3 a lot in the waste sustainability problem we're working to solve. Typically, you will usually find this, people come across this all the time. I said, like, they want to sell something, but they're like, people don't know enough for me to even sell this thing, like so that they don't get it. Usually, there will be a particular type of customer who does have this knowledge. So say, for example, you were trying to sell, sustainability, waste sustainability product or service to people. Granted, people in general do not probably have this level of understanding in order for them to find Victor's solution useful, but people is too broad. Okay, people in the sustainability, waste sustainability area, okay, cool. Again, too broad. Who within this, and we'll talk about this a bit later on, but who within this group of people does have that knowledge?
Actually, I'm doing a project at the moment. I'm trying to let me pull up a profile quickly. I'm doing a project, and it's got a question kind of related to not waste sustainability itself, but a question related to kind of proving sustainability, or kind of how invested people are in it. So one of the things we looked at, this is actually a qualifying question that we use to gauge whether this person does kind of meet our threshold. But one of the aspects of the criteria is interested in environmentally friendly and sustainable ways of living. Now, as kind of the point Dan's making, that's a vague sentence. So we need to pin that down and try and understand, okay, what are some markers that we can agree on as being something that might indicate that they are interested in these particular types of ways of living. And within that, you can be super niche depending on the need of the business. But the wider you go, the larger your pool is. So here are some basic examples, because in this particular profile, we weren't going too deep. So we had, the question was, which of the following environmentally friendly and sustainable ways of living do you engage with? Eating fewer animal products, reducing airplane travel, recycling plastic and reducing plastic consumption, donating to a sustainable environmental cause every month or year. And then there's a very specific one related to the nature of the subject, which I'll leave out. But it's these little bits which allow you to go and think, okay, people are unaware of the problem, but what subsects and what groups of people do have a greater level of knowledge, or a great enough level of knowledge that I may be able to sell to them.
And again, we generally talk about specificity and niches, but usually the more niche the problem is, the more need that they may actually have. So people may not have a particular need for this sustainability products, but the people who do may really need it. So you want to try and figure out who those people are. Cool. We'll give you a 5-minute break, and then we'll go through the last bit. Come back at 26 part. We'll start bang on because there's a lot of content to go through. But yeah, let's take a break for now. Just a couple more, a minute or so. Also, I think I'm gonna make a move. So in the chat, Tyrell has asked a wonderful question. What do you do when you find who those people are? This is talking about people who are potentially your target customer, yet they don't seem to be educated in their problem. So I have a point of view, but I think Joshua, I will let Joshua go, and then depending on how different it is, I may add some, my point of view, but go.
I mean, I think it's a contextual question because not everybody will be able to do the same things as a kind of response activity to that. One of the ways in which you can do that is from a product kind of perspective, which is if they're not yet educated enough to become a customer, are they educated enough, or do they have the interest enough for you to keep them within your ecosystem? And that may, the way you do that may vary. So for some people, that might just mean I want to continue to them through content. So that might mean onboarding them into your social media streams, into your newsletters, and educating them over time in that way. Another way of doing it is, okay, so you're not educated enough to be a customer, but can I get you to be a user, and through using the product, better understand and become aware of the problem you're facing, and now how this problem, how this solution can begin to solve it. That, again, I say is not necessarily an option for everyone, because not everybody has the resources to onboard free users. But those are kind of some of the basic ways that you could look to do that. Another is, if you have the time, is to actually just spend more time with these individuals in terms of getting them to understand and kind of explore the conversation of the problem experience at the moment. Because I think when we do a lot of our work, interviews, and more interviews and surveys, because surveys is less of a back and forth interaction, but simply by putting the questions around the problem that you're trying to solve encourages your target user or customer to become aware of the problem and face it. And over time, that activity in itself can begin to educate the individuals as well, or at least make them more aware of the problem that they are facing. So those are some methods you can use, both from kind of time-heavy options, but also kind of content-led and more kind of distance-based options as well. Dan, was there another route you were?
Yeah, so I guess the other thing, so as you said before, if your customer does not recognize that they have the problem in the first place, you have a number of options. I can either tell you and try and convert you. So once I've told you, hey, you don't know that going to the gym 5 times a week is really beneficial for you. I'm just going to keep telling you this and then hope you come to my gym. Or I can decide to find someone who recognizes the problem and try and just tell them to come to my gym, who's already going to the gym a number of times a week, who's already doing activities that are gym related, like maybe they're going running. Actually, rather than running in a dangerous park, you could come to my really safe gym. It's all about the decision-making process and the tolerance for risk. Do I risk it by telling these people that, oh yeah, you didn't know that going to the gym would increase your life expectancy by 400 years. I'm going to now tell you about this and spend time, create content, just engage with you until you do that. Challenge that you have with that is that once people recognize that the problem exists, I now understand that sustainability is really important. I now understand that D&I is really important. Who else does D&I stuff? Who else does sustainability stuff? Then now they recognize that the problem exists, and now potentially like, okay, cool, thank you for telling me about this, but I'm now going to see if there are any other providers.
Yeah, you may edge yourself out of a customer.
Yeah. The benefit of educating people though is that you build a relationship with them. So they might be like, oh, actually, I really like the way that you did that. I'm gonna buy from you, but they might not. So this is what we're talking about with the risk. Cool. Boop, boop, boop. Framing the problem. Your business must be solving a problem or fulfilling a need. There are many problems to solve for many different types of customer. And the customer discovery process is based on figuring out the size of the problem and the need for your target customer. How big is this problem? So my brother likes to use the term a hair on fire problem. As in, like, if someone has their hair on fire, they recognize that they have their hair on fire and they're probably desperately trying to solve this, that hair being on fire situation for them. That's a big problem. A small problem is I stub my toe on a regular basis. It's kind of annoying, but it's fine. How much of this is a need for your customer? Is this a big need for them to solve it? Is it not? I also like to talk about the frequency of the problem and predictability. These are aspects of a problem, because if a problem is frequent, small-ish, but frequent, they might pay for it to be solved. If it's large and frequent, they definitely are. Depending on the customer, of course.
And around this, it doesn't have to swing one way or the other. For example, there are certain businesses and certain services and business models where it's, as Dan said, this is a small but frequent problem. That sounds like that might be solved by some kind of subscription. I can't figure out what film or TV show or movie I want to watch. I'm being a little facetious and simplistic, but Netflix or some other streaming platform could solve that problem, which is a regular need. Other problems are huge, but like happen once a year. Tax, all tax services, well, not all, but some people engage with tax maybe later on in the year or once a year, because it is only critical to them at one point. So this is not to say that just because your problem is small, that it doesn't mean it's worth solving, or doesn't mean that people won't pay for it. But is it small and experience, or is it large but critical enough that when it does come around, people still need or are willing to pay for a solution to solve it for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And Bao just dropped an amazing point in the chat. Just to add to Tectonic's point on assuming your customer is educated enough, I would add people are not logical, so you cannot always trust your customer that can understand what seems logical. There's a whole field of behavioral economics, social psychology, behavioral science that would recommend you read and understand books such as Predictably, Irrational, Nudged, Hooked, Made Stick. Yeah, really good point. Also, people lie, and we'll talk about that later. But it's like, how healthy are you? Yeah, I'm pretty healthy. Would you pay £10 a month to use a product that will keep you healthy forever? Yeah, cool.
Have you ever done that?
Have you ever, what do you pay £10 a month for now? Nothing.
Don't even pay for my Netflix.
Yeah. So like understand, so the nature of people is that oftentimes they're illogical, irrational. Sometimes people have rose-tinted views about what they will do. And we'll talk about a bit about this later as well. So basing things on the activities that I've done in the past is a much better indicator of what they will do in the future. Yeah, that's on that point, but thank you so much. So we'll skip this because we don't have time, but Netflix, Netflix initially solving the problem of boredom for people that wants to watch TV. Now they are solving the problem of quality television. The problem that they're solving changes. They also have internal problems that they're trying to solve. As Joshua just mentioned, Netflix sharing. For them, people sharing their passwords was fine. For the longest time, it's not now because there are so many competitors in the market. There's Disney, there's Hulu, there's Now TV, there's everything, right? So they have internal problems, they have external problems for their customer. As I was talking about, the market changes. When Netflix first started, there weren't that many other streaming channels. Now there are. Disney came along solving a different problem, but a similar problem. Disney have a single place for people to get all of the Disney content. Before, you'd have to buy all the DVDs, the videos, VHSs, if you're old like me. Like trying to get Disney stuff content, difficult. With Disney Plus, easier. But it's now a competitor to all the other platforms, solving different problems. Lots of people try to hide the problem that they're trying to solve with complexity and lots of words. If I asked you what problem your business is trying to solve, many of you, depending, I'm being facetious again, but would give me a paragraph or talk a long time. This can make it difficult for your potential customers to understand or recognize themselves in the problem. I'm making an app to help people get healthier. Even in its simplicity, it's not specific enough. And being not specific or talking too much about and not being detailed enough in what you're trying to talk about makes it harder to sell to people. So you want to write your problem that you're trying to solve as simply as you can. A good method is to write it so that a 5-year-old could understand it. I used to be a copywriter. Writing things to make yourself look clever is not useful. You'll notice our decks are really simple. So I'm trying to get the point across.
And we will come back to this as a more general point, but for this this slide as well. Session 1 and 2 today and Wednesday, we're really going through kind of these fundamental core ideas. And then on the Friday, there'll be some tasks related to some of the topics that we've gone through for you to make a start on, one of which will be around problems, but also as work for you to do as well. So if at the moment you're feeling like, yeah, this is cool, but how do I apply it and how do I make it useful for my own instance, then we'll get to that as well and give you some more tips on how to go about that.
Absolutely. But yeah, being clear in the problem that you're trying to solve makes it easier for you to determine whether you are solving that problem. The vagueness in which you write it lets people go, oh, actually, I'm kind of solving this, or like they're trying to hide behind it. Am I helping people get healthier? Am I helping young professionals with kids improve their fitness by 20% every month? Yes or no? Customer profiles. You've got assumptions, and you need to create some assumed customer profiles. And I talk about assumed because they are an assumption. A customer profile is a humanized view of your target customer. Good customer profile is made up of characteristics and behaviors. So typically, when people write their customer profiles, they write marketing profiles. Like, oh, they're like, live in West London and like they got like 45, they make 45 grand a year, and they like coffee, and they got like blonde hair, and yeah, they use Instagram. It's not useful to determine whether the problem that you're solving is actually a problem, and also like, how do you find these people? You just go to West London and just ask, see if you spot anyone. Not useful. A good customer profile is made up of characteristics and behaviors that you can determine, that you can use to find people, so you can determine whether the assumptions that you're making are true or untrue. Attributes such as age, educational attainment, if necessary, gender, if necessary, salary, decision maker, budget holder. And we'll talk about the decision maker and budget holder a bit specifically. But like typically the early ones are what people use for their marketing profiles. And it might be useful for your product or service. However, are they the decision maker? Are they the budget holder? That is a characteristic that you might be looking for in determining whether this person is suitable enough for me to even talk to them in order for me to find out whether they could be my customer or user. Behaviors. Examples of actions your customer takes. If I'm building an app for gym goers or I'm building a gym, they already go to the gym twice a week. If I'm building a meeting app, they already have team meetings once a month. If they don't have any team meetings and I'm trying to sell them a meetings app, much more challenging. If they're already having 40 team meetings and there are and managing them is a nightmare, cool, maybe they want this. What behaviors or actions are my customers taking that make them more likely than not to be my customer? They're already running D&I initiative. They are already training for marathons. They're already writing posts on the importance of mental health. They're already going to the salon twice a month. There are slight differences between the B2B and B2C customer profiles, but I'm going to let Joshua go into this because this is his favorite.
This is where it all gets done. So yeah, I'll bring up some kind of real life examples in a second as well, but there's a bit of crossover here between the two. Even though it's on the right, I'm gonna start with the B2C one because that might be one that we kind of typically think about. So as Dan said, this kind of marketing profile aspect when we're thinking about how, if I was telling a friend, could I pick these people out of the street, like visually identify them? So this age range, kind of gender, occupation, income, location. These are useful things to think about once you've understood if they are a customer or potential customer at their core. So it's kind of like, if I figure out if that they are exhibiting the key behaviors and that they have an education around the problem, or these are my assumptions, I assume they have an education around the problem or they experience the problem. Once I speak to enough of those people, then I may be able to abstract how old were they, what was their income, was there a particular gender that felt the problem more, in which area of the country did they live? Those are things that you can think about afterwards, rather than kind of going, I think I want to serve, as Dan said, this West London profile, and then I'll just see if it happens to be true for that group. And when I say this in terms of like taking those bits away, I'll read out a profile that we used, which was around homeowners. And you can see that some of that age aspect and stuff was less relevant initially, and then it's something that you work out later. So we were looking to speak to homeowners because we were interested in having conversations about their roofs, what they did with their roofs. So the profile was as simple as they are a US homeowner, meaning they have ownership or control of the property's roof space, so they don't live in an apartment that they don't have control over it. They are the decision maker of the property in relation to doing DIY and home renovations. And also after that, we were like, okay, and let's get like a mix of demographics across age, locations, so states in the US, as well as house value. You notice there that even though there's a demographics part, I'm not locking myself to the belief that blonde people in Arizona are the only people that may have control over their roofs and be interested in the thing that I'm trying to sell. It's actually, what are the core aspects? And then we'll just collect data around the other bits. And then in post, in analysis, we'll figure out, okay, if I spoke to enough people, now can I work out and think, yeah, maybe it's actually worth spending more time with people in Arizona because there's more sun, or whatever thing that might be related to your business. So when we list these things, we want you to consider them all, But actually, there are a few elements here that actually define who the target customer is. And it's typically even across this blend of, are they a decision maker? And the reason, if we haven't touched on it yet, the reason why this is key is, as Dan said, when he was in IT and these new IT products were being forced upon him, Dan was not the decision maker. Dan was the user. Dan was not the customer. So ideally, we want to speak and interview, survey, and sell to someone who is a decision maker, because it's their knowledge and their understanding that is key. If Dan didn't know how to use it, that wasn't a blocker for his manager on whether he was going to buy it or not. I bought it, figure it out.
True.
So thinking about that, are they a decision maker? This core pain point or problem, it wasn't about Dan's key pain points or core problems. It was, I can't speak for the exact example, but we might not be at the efficiency that the board needs my department to be at. I'm going to buy something that I believe may solve that. It solves my problem. Now, there are other problems that are related to that, but this is where we talk about not everyone in the cycle or in the funnel has the same problem. So again, who's the key decision maker? What's the key problem we think, or key activities, and then key behaviors around it? They already knew that because it was Dan's job, he was exhibiting the behavior of someone who could and would have to use this product. So that's one example. On the B2B side of things, which is more relevant to kind of that, what we talk about there with Dan, this is where role title and those kind of like identification points are more key. And the reason why is because in this kind of case, you're actually defining yourself often, if not to one industry, but to a number of industries. And that means that there is a finite number of people, but also a finite group of different types of people doing different things that you can access. Now, rather than just throwing a blanket over them and going, I think all of them might be relevant in the fintech industry, as we spoke about before, how can we become more niche? How can we become more detailed, more specific? Again, like if you were talking to your 5-year-old, if you were speaking to a 5-year-old, like, my business is related to the bank, that's not that clear. My business is related to the people that give the money out at the bank. Okay, that's a little bit clearer. So thinking about these kind of things, that the role title and the target industry are kind of immediate things you need to focus on. Things like years of experience.
Just very quickly, lots of different industries and companies have different titles for the same role. So like you might have like head of HR, head of people, like they might be. So what you're trying to probably figure out is like, and Josh will talk about this, but like, what are their actual like
responsibilities? Yeah.
Might have different role titles, but the same responsibilities.
Yeah. So while Dan's kind of touched on that point, typically when we do the B2B work, for cutting down time in terms of trying to find people, sourcing people to interview, we might go, here are some B2B roles that we think may be relevant. However, what underpins all of this is if any role meets these responsibilities, and I'll give you an example of what the responsibility might mean in a sec, but if they meet any of these responsibilities, I don't care what the title of their role is, because actually the person I want to speak to is not head of HR, it's just whoever makes head of HR decisions. So an example of that, I'll pull up another one, would be, we were speaking to recently in a project, people within kind of groceries and supermarkets, and then it was kind of about reduced to sell items. So we highlighted that the potential roles that might be worthwhile speaking to were kind of heads of or regional managers of sustainability, finance, operations, and marketing. However, if anybody had the responsibility or was accountable for making decisions related to reduced to sell items or sales optimizations, particularly in terms of partnerships and sales campaigns and initiatives, their role title was no longer relevant because they're involved in the activities that I want to learn about and that are related to the problem relate to the solution that I want to sell in. So on the B2B side of things, we use these kind of indicators to narrow down our search, but ultimately we are underpinned by, similar to the B2C profile, are they a decision maker? Are they exhibiting key behaviors? Or do they engage with the key responsibilities that would make them worthwhile to talk to? And as we kind of said before, these are all an assumption. So it may be that you do get in front of the people that, based on this criteria, meet the profile that you think is true. When you get in there, it might actually be the case that, oh, although you do have this responsibility, perhaps to be the person I can sell to, you do need to be that role title, because actually those individuals have the final say about the decisions being made. I'm sure Dan's manager at the point may not have made that decision entirely by themselves. They may have had to get approval from above. So there's a hierarchy to these things as well, which I think is what comes up on the next slide.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we'll have to watch through this. But again, the other thing is the activities that you're taking are exploratory. I'm trying to find out information. Maybe actually, so for example, I remember one of the projects that we worked on is they were trying to find out how much they need to price their product at. And they were talking to people in HR, and they realized that underneath £10,000, a junior or midweight role could make the decision. But then over that, it had to go to someone else. So they were like, cool, let's charge £9,999. So like understanding who your customer is and what decisions they make and how they make decisions allow you to make those business decisions that you need to make. We call this thing the sales ecosystem. Sales ecosystem is full of 4 profiles. Customer transacts for the product or service, agrees to purchase, is potentially a decision maker. The user may not pay for the product or service, but gains benefit when using it. Influencer may not pay for or use the product or service, but as an ally that influences the sale, likely for their own benefit, and often close to the decision maker. A facilitator, integral role that the sale would not happen if they were not on board, helps the transaction go through smoothly, and uses the product or service to make their lives easier. So these are profiles that we've created based on our understanding and reality of trying to sell products and services. And the more we do this, the more we recognize that this is true. Example, tutoring. The customer, potentially a parent. The user, the student or child. Influencer may be, or facilitator may be a teacher. Your kid needs tutoring. I don't have the time for this. Or I don't have the expertise that they need. In B2B sales, my manager was the customer, I was the user. The CTO might have been the influencer or facilitator. Telling my manager to, you should probably check this out. These guys spoke to me, but it might be a cool product for your team. Understanding who the person is within the sales ecosystem allows you to make decisions, or trying to think, you might think that someone is the user, but actually turns out that they're the customer, or the other way around. You might speak to someone and you're actually like, and it happens all the time. I thought that this person was going to be the customer, but actually they're just they don't have that much power within the organization. They just talk a lot. So you can use that to figure out who the customer might be.
On the flip side as well, particularly if we take the example of an influencer here, more so in probably a B2B context, but anyone who is close to the decision maker, or is, if not even the final person making the decision, but involved in the decision-making process, is still someone you can gain a lot of insight from, and it's still someone who is beneficial to understand and talk to. So that's, again, this kind of point I'm trying to underline in terms of the responsibilities piece is although there is one or a group of individuals that may make the ultimate decision about whether they're going to purchase or not, there are so many individuals within this ecosystem that you can learn from. And they shouldn't be dismissed because they don't make the final decision.
And the other thing that happens is, and this happened a lot when I was in my agency, was though I was not the customer, I was the user of these IT systems. What typically would happen is the salesperson from this large company would come in, do a bang up job of selling in the product within the company. And then within a year, we stopped using it because it was garbage. So like, you have to also make sure that you understand the user's problems and needs and solve for them in order for you to be, for your retention. Because if you have to then go out every year to find new customers because your customers keep leaving after a year, your life is long. But actually providing real value by engaging with your customers and your users, and make sure that you understand the problem, solving the problem for them, will help them stay with you, which then means it's much easier for you to grow your business, because retention is the best form of growth. And also, the longer you provide value to your customers, the easier it is for them to tell other people about your product or service, and you lower your marketing costs. Cool. I think we're done. Yeah, we're going to ask a question, but I think we've got a couple minutes for questions. If anyone has any, I shall potentially stop sharing my screen.
And these questions can be related directly to the course material, or kind of anything that you was stirred in your head when you were thinking about your own business whilst listening.
Yep. And just to let you know as well, like, some of these thoughts and things are potentially challenging and bracing because they sound simple, but they're really fucking hard.
So I have a question, guys, just around defining the problem. What if there's multiple problems that you can see?
That is a good question.
Should you start with the highest priority one and then work through the others, or do you just look at all of them when you're doing your customer validation and assumptions?
So there's two ways that's not true. There's multiple ways, but essentially, whenever you engage with a target customer, one way or another, you should always be asking them, what are their biggest challenges in X area? Now, you may have your own list of things that you believe to be true, but what you have to make sure when you talk about the problem that's most important, if you're going to take that route, it has to be from their perspective and from their understanding. So sometimes that means asking them generally what are their biggest challenges and letting them speak and letting it unfold. If you're not hearing the answer to what you want to hear, which is, this is the problem I want to solve, and this is the problem I think you have, of course, you can ask direct questions around that and whether that is a challenge. But with this broader problems piece, you want to be solving the problem that they experience the most, are upset about the most, and are most willing to pay for. I recognize that that's not always a trifecta. They may want to pay for one, they may experience one more, and whatever the other thing I said was, but you are ideally looking for, where do you marry up on those three, and then prioritize from there.
Yeah, because this is the hardest part. There's a disconnect. This is what I want to do. This is what they want to do. And generally, people are like, I hope that they are happy with the things that I want to do. But actually, you want to focus on their needs. Tell me about your biggest challenges. Why are they your biggest challenges? How have you tried to solve them? Why have you tried to solve them like this? What else comes? Like, understanding that, and then when you do that enough with the right target customers, you'll usually start doing the same thing over again. And that should help you prioritize your roadmap, it'll help you do your marketing, it'll help you do all the things because they've told you.
Yeah, and that's probably the unwritten thing about customer discovery and consolidation. You are submitting yourself to the wants and the needs of your customer at the sacrifice, essentially, of everything you want to do. Now, there's the decision to be made. If your target customer wants something that veers so far away from what you're interested in, you don't have to pursue that. But you do have to recognize what their desires are, if that matches up with what you want to do, and then if you want to pursue that. Because we've been in the case before where we've tried to, either through not knowing well enough what our target customer wanted, or knowing too well what we wanted to do, and just thought, oh, well, I'm going to plow forwards anyway, and because they'll eventually buy, right? That back and forth, they could keep you hanging on for years. We had a business before Tectonic, it was a music startup. We were hanging on for years. They weren't buying. We were doing our best to sell. They were never going to buy. But because we were so wedded to the idea that we thought we had something worth selling, we couldn't see the fact that they weren't interested. And I'm not saying that's the case for you, but that's the danger of, there's a problem I think they have, and I'm going to pursue that, rather than this is the problem they say they have, and I'm going to make a decision as to whether I want to pursue solving that or not.
And it is a decision. Like you can, like Joshua said, you can just be like, no, I'm just going to do this. But at least you have the knowledge. It's not
we didn't have the knowledge. We thought we were right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add. So the problem thing, it is hard to gauge. Yeah, but there'll be things that customers will have, and they feel more pain with that problem, that they're willing to pay to resolve it. There'll be other problems that they'll be able to put to one side, or they'll circumnavigate around it and be able to deal with it, but it's not as painful or as frequent. Again, frequency is another thing. How often do they feel this problem is another factor in whether or not that would be the one that you would target. Yeah, so it's not black and white, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is there's a challenging part of, like, there are some people who are interested in things. Like, I'm interested in all things to do with no code. So if someone wants to talk to me about no code stuff, I am super interested. I'm interested in all things to do with AI. I might not be buying that because my problems are based in something else. So, like, you need to recognize when you're talking to people, is this my target customer or not? Just because they're passionate about the problem being solved and they can talk about it for ages, they might not be the customer. What evidence do they have that makes them potentially my customer?
Yeah, and another example is, like, you think about how many apps there are available on the mobile phones. Yeah, like, I don't know if I've only paid for a few, only ever a few, but I've got lots of apps on my phone. Yeah, and it's only the ones that I feel like it's really, really useful or really solves a problem of mine that I pay for it. Yeah, but it's very rare, actually. I've probably one or two that I ever paid for, but there's so many apps available that sort of solve so many problems for people. Yeah, but I won't pay for all of them. Yeah.
And even the fact that they have paid for some doesn't necessarily mean that they are a customer. I've paid for a lot of apps because I'm like, cool, that's great. Like this one that I'm using right now, I'm like, yeah, I might not be this company's the exact target customer just because I've paid for it. What evidence do they have? What am I trying to do? What problem am I trying to solve?
The last thing on that I'll say is that sometimes what people are paying for, they're not necessarily ranting and raving about. I pay Google to just give me more storage space for my high quality photos. You are the most people I've ever told about that, because it doesn't matter. No one cares. But it solves my problem that every time I go on, whenever I hear anyone talking about, oh, my phone doesn't have enough storage, I'm like, okay, that's your problem. I'm never going to experience that because Google will take my $249. It just came out, $249 every year. I'm not even thinking about it. Now, obviously, that's a business model that requires scale. It's a different thing. But when we talked about that kind of hair on fire problem, the frequency aspect, all of these things, sometimes simple convenience and not having to think about it again is the kind of space that the problem will occupy. Not every problem people are going to shout out about. So that's why it's really key, as I was answering the question before, is understanding from their perspective, what are the biggest challenges? Because if you ask me what was the biggest challenge about photo storage, you might begin to get those answers. But if you just said whatever question around the photo problem you thought I had, or the photo problem you wanted to solve, we might never have got there. So you have to give space for people to express the problems that they're experiencing, and not just try and confirm problems that you think they may have.
And just very quickly, Rohit, very quickly, Rohit's asked a question. Are there any tools which can help you ask potential target B2B customers questions to validate your offering in an anonymized way, so you can get feedback and fine tune your offering before pitching to them? I'm literally building that tool. So I will show, show more on Wednesday or Friday, or share with Carolina and we can share it with you. But,
yeah, and Victor, your question, we are literally doing that content next session.
I was going to say, we've got some great questions in the chat. We love that. Please keep them coming. And don't forget, we still have 2 more sessions with Dan and Joshua. So some of these will be already answered in the workshop, and then you will also have a chance to ask your questions. Then from my end, well, all I want to say, Dan, Joshua, I just missed you. Thank you so much for a great session today, a kickoff of a great module. For our lovely cohort, well, that's for you to digest now. We'll see you again on Wednesday, 9:30 for the next session. And all of the materials from today, as well as this recording, will be available on Accelerator app by the end of this week. So we'll be sending you also an email with all of the details how to access that. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, and see you on Wednesday. Bye.